Okay, today's Q&A is about lab-grown meat. And the question is from a person who's vegetarian, and they're hoping that one day there's going to be kosher lab-grown meat. And the question is that happening? Is it going to happen that we will have actual kosher lab-grown meat? So the idea of lab-grown meat is people are trying to create a food that has all the properties of meat, but does so without using any animals. Magic. So one example of that is something called the Impossible Burger. It's made completely from vegetable sources, and it needs hashgacha because it's a very complicated item, but it doesn't have any unique shilas to it, just the regular, traditional kashrus issues to be taken care of. But the term, when we say lab-grown meat, usually that means is a process where you take special cells, they're called stem cells, you take those from an animal or a bird, and you propagate them, you grow them using ingredients that have no meat in them. So you start with this one stem cell or this batch of stem cells. You allow it to grow using different ingredients that are not from animals at all, and it grow. If you do it correctly, if you know what you're doing, you create a piece of meat out of that, a piece of steak out of that in this process. So the real stem cell that comes from an animal is turning the nutrients into meat, sort of like the cell would do if it was in the animal's body. You would take nutrients that the animal eats and convert it into meat also. So the important point for us is that, of course, those other ingredients would have to be kosher, but what's important for us is that you need to start with a stem cell that comes from an actual animal, seemingly that comes from an animal or bird, and that has several, kashrus issues. Okay, because the most obvious way to get stem cells is to take them from an animal while it's still alive, and invariably, those cells are going to be forbidden as basar min achai, which is you're not allowed to use meat from a living animal, even if the animal is from a kosher species. Now, people have asked questions that whether those cells should be considered microscopic. The question is not correct for two simple reasons. One is that they don't actually start with something microscopic. They usually just take a chunk of meat as for their stem cells. And second is, there's a true in Mincha Shlomo from Shlomo Zalman that in being not visible would not be a heter in this case for reasons that are beyond today's little Q&A. So the taking it from a live animal would seem to be also as basar min achai. Okay, well, it is possible to get it seems to be possible to get the stem cells from an animal right after it dies or it's slaughtered. But for order that to be kosher, the animal would have to be a kosher species. Okay, not so hard. Have to have shechita, be checked for treifas, and maybe even have malicha done to it, which would add all kinds of logistical issues, challenges to what's going on over here, and make it basically impossible from a technical standpoint to actually get stem cells from that. Now, that's from the technical side, but most contemporary poskim think that if they did that, if they actually did the shechita, etc., and got a stem cell from a kosher animal after they had shechita, what the meat, the items, the lab-grown meat that we made from that would be considered fleishigs. Now, for Jewish consumers, that might be acceptable to label it as fleishigs, and they'll just deal with it appropriately. But in this industry, that would be like the kiss of death. I mean, you can't label something as meat when your whole point here is that you're trying to be meat-free. If the rabbi is going to label it meat, seemingly that's never going to sell for the kind of product that they're trying to make. So rabbis have been working together with researchers to try to find ways to get stem cells avoiding these issues, meaning not coming from living animals, but yet coming from kosher animals in ways that would allow them to still be kosher and not be basar min achai. There's lots of scientific limitations, obviously, to what's going on here. And as a rule, poskim are cautious people who don't want to approve something novel like this unless there's consensus with other rabbis or until they have time to think it through and make sure they're really making the right decision. But I will mention that a lot of the people who've talking about this, a lot of the poskim who are speaking about this say that even if there was a way to get stem cells that are kosher through one of these methods, and even if it was possible that the stem cells could potentially even be themselves could be considered parv, again, this talks about how to possibly make that happen. Even so, the finished product would be labeled meat. And they give different reasons for that. Some say that it is meat because it has all the DNA and the features of a piece of a meat, and therefore it should be actually treated as a piece of meat. Others say, well, it's not a piece of meat, but the same way that Chazal forbade us from eating poultry with milk because it seems like meat. Chicken seems like meat, so they said don't eat chicken with meat, even though with the rice that would have been permitted. So too, this thing which looks exactly like a piece of meat is included in that Gzera D'Rabbanan to not eat things that seem like meat together with milk also. So those most are taking this position that even if they made it in a way that came from, so to speak, part of ingredients, it would be considered fleischigs. Now, this whole industry is in its infancy, so we will have to yet see what happens and whether this actually comes to market in a way that can be enjoyed from consumers.